My name is Emily Parker. I am 38 years old, and I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, where the loudest thing you usually hear is the wind sweeping across empty cornfields. I used to think I was just an ordinary woman, someone who went to work, came home, paid the bills, and tried to stay out of trouble. For the past 8 years, I worked at Brightway Marketing, a mid-sized company that smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink, and that felt like my second home. I lived for that job, waking up before the sun, staying late long after the lights went out, and quietly making sure everything ran smoothly while louder people took the credit. I never wanted fame or attention. I only wanted respect and a chance to build a good life. But I learned the hard way that in some places, silence is not golden. It is dangerous. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and wet, the kind of morning where the rain seems to slap the windows with cold hands. I remember walking into the office with a warm coffee in one hand and my favorite blue umbrella dripping all over the floor. I thought it was going to be an ordinary day of answering emails and preparing presentations. But instead, my life was about to turn upside down in the most humiliating way imaginable. Charles Bennett, my boss and the king of dramatic gestures, called me into the conference room. The long table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his reflection stared back at me from the polished wood like a warning. I sat down quietly, tucking a strand of wet hair behind my ear, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. He leaned forward, fingers interlocked, and gave me a smirk I had seen many times before, the kind of smirk that always came right before bad news. "Emily, your quietness is a problem," he said, his voice sharp and casual at the same time, like he was commenting on the weather. "We need people who speak up. We need leaders. People like you hold this company back." I just stared at him, stunned, the words bouncing around my head like marbles on a floor. I had spent 8 loyal years here, never missing a deadline, never betraying anyone, always cleaning up other people's messes. And this was how it ended. He did not ask if I wanted to improve or if I wanted help. He did not offer a warning or a conversation. He just handed me the termination papers like my life was nothing more than a disposable file in his drawer. And the worst part, the part that still stings when I think about it, was the way he smiled, almost enjoying my shock, as if firing me for being quiet was his personal victory. I packed my things in a cardboard box with trembling hands. My desk was not fancy, but it held 8 years of my life in sticky notes, coffee mugs, and tiny frame photos of my husband David and me on vacations we could barely afford. As I walked to the elevator, the office felt like a stage where I had been the silent background character in someone else's loud play. I heard muffled laughter from the break room, and I knew some of them were laughing at me. I kept my head down, biting the inside of my cheek to keep the tears from falling in front of them. Outside, the rain felt colder than before, soaking through my coat as I stood on the sidewalk with that pathetic box in my arms. My face burned with humiliation, and a small, quiet spark of anger began to form in my chest. That was the day I learned that being invisible in the wrong place can destroy you. But it was also the day that planted the first seed of something I did not know I had in me. As the rain poured down and the city seemed to swallow me whole, I whispered to myself, "They will regret this." I had no idea how or when, and I was still shaking with shock and sadness, but deep inside, I knew I could not let them define me as a shadow. They wanted a voice. One day they would hear mine loud and clear in the only language they would ever respect: success. Brightway Marketing had been my second home for almost a decade. I started working there when I was 30 years old. A little nervous, but full of hope, believing that hard work and loyalty would always pay off. The office was not glamorous, But to me, it was the center of the world. The air smelled of burnt coffee and fresh printer paper, and the sound of clacking keyboards and squeaky office chairs was like background music to my life. I spent years in that space, sitting at my modest desk by the window, where I could watch the city's traffic crawl by during long nights when everyone else had already gone home. Those walls saw me arrive early, stay late, and give more of myself than anyone ever asked for. I thought if I worked hard enough, someone would eventually see me. The company itself was a strange place, like a high school cafeteria disguised as a business. People were divided into little cliques, whispering in corners, forming alliances that had nothing to do with actual work. If you were loud and charming, you got promotions. If you laughed at Charles Bennett's jokes, you got invited to client dinners. If you dared to stay quiet and just do your job well, you became invisible. I never fit in with the noisy group that circled Charles like moths around a light. I kept my head down, finished my projects ahead of schedule, and silently rescued campaigns when others messed up. I told myself it was better to let my work speak for me. I did not realize that in a place like Brightway, your work only mattered if someone louder was there to brag about it. Charles Bennett ruled that office like a king on a paper throne. He was in his 50s, with perfectly combed gray hair and a voice that carried across the building like a warning bell. He loved attention more than results, and he fed off flattery the way some people need air. If he liked you, your career bloomed overnight. If he decided you were not worth his time, you could vanish and no one would notice. He had a way of turning people against each other without lifting a finger, and the louder employees played along because they wanted his approval. I was never part of that game. I thought keeping my head down was safe. I thought being professional meant staying out of the politics. That was my mistake. I remember Sarah Miller, one of my few friends in the office, always warning me, "Emily, you have to speak up more in meetings," she would whisper during coffee breaks. "Charles likes people who take the spotlight. He thinks silence means weakness." I would just smile and shrug, thinking that results were what really mattered in business. I had brought in Oakwood Furniture, one of the company's biggest accounts, and led them to record profits just a few months before I was fired. I thought loyalty and performance would protect me. I did not realize that in Charles's world, my quiet competence made me disposable. The truth is, I was living in an office full of noise, and the only language anyone heard was volume and ego. Looking back now, I can see how that office was slowly draining me. Like a leaky faucet you do not notice until the water bill arrives. Every day I gave more of myself, thinking I was climbing a ladder that was actually leaning against the wrong wall. I had convinced myself that if I just stayed consistent, I would be rewarded. But the walls of Brightway marketing had their own rules. If you were not performing on their stage, you were not even part of the play. I was the quiet worker behind the curtain, the person they relied on but never applauded, and I did not know that my silence was painting a target on my back. That building I once called a second home was never really home at all. It was a trap, and I was walking straight into it with a polite smile and a coffee cup in hand, unaware that my loyalty was being mistaken for weakness. The betrayal did not come like a lightning strike. It crept in quietly, the way frost covers a window overnight, until I realized I was completely frozen out. The morning Charles fired me was humiliating, but the real sting came from the people I had trusted. For 8 years, I had believed that my coworkers were my team, that loyalty went both ways, and that hard work built unspoken friendships. But in the end, all I saw were turned backs and lowered eyes. As Charles slid those termination papers across the polished table, I glanced around the room, silently begging someone to speak up for me, to remind him that I was the one who had saved the Oakwood account, the one who had stayed late when everyone else left. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner and the tap-tap of Charles's pen as he waited for me to sign away my career. Sarah Miller, my closest friend at Brightway, stood by the doorway clutching a folder like a shield. She could not look at me. Her eyes darted to the floor, then to Charles, and then away again. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Just the week before, we had shared lunch and laughed about office gossip, and she had promised she had my back in every meeting. But in that room, when my voice was trapped in my throat, she stayed silent. It was as if my quietness was contagious, as if defending me would infect her with whatever disease Charles claimed I had. That was the moment I realized the truth. In that office, friendships lasted only until they became inconvenient. Charles's words were cruel but calm, and that made them cut even deeper. "You are just not leadership material, Emily," he said, his tone almost rehearsed. "You are too quiet, too reserved. We need people who speak up, who take charge." I wanted to scream that I had been leading all along, just not in the flashy way he admired. I wanted to remind him of the nights I had fixed last-minute presentations while he was out golfing, or the weekends I had spent smoothing over angry clients he had neglected. But my throat was tight, and my pride held my words prisoner. I simply nodded, signed the paper, and felt my world tilt off its axis. My hands were shaking so badly that the pen left a tiny smear of ink on the edge of the page. When I walked back to my desk to pack, the office was alive with whispers. I could feel eyes following me, pretending to be focused on their screens while their curiosity buzzed like electric static in the air. A couple of people even smiled faintly, as if my downfall was a form of entertainment. I forced my hands to move steadily as I filled a cardboard box with the tiny pieces of my work life. My favorite pen, a small plant, a framed picture of David and me on our first anniversary. 8 years of my life reduced to a box that felt lighter than my chest. Sarah approached me timidly, her voice a trembling whisper. "I am so sorry, Emily. She stopped herself, glanced around, and stepped back without finishing her sentence. That hurt worse than the firing itself. The elevator ride down felt endless, a slow descent from the world I had built my identity around to the cold reality waiting outside. The doors opened, and the rain had only grown heavier. I stepped into the storm with my box, the water soaking my coat and dripping into my shoes. I could still hear faint laughter echoing in my head, laughter from the very people I had once stayed late to help. I stood there for a moment, my face burning with humiliation and anger, mixing like poison in my veins. My quiet nature had cost me everything, and the people I trusted had abandoned me without hesitation. That was the moment betrayal turned into a silent promise. They thought they had erased me from their world, but they had only lit a fire in mine. I whispered to myself, barely audible over the rain, "One day, you will wish you had never done this." The weeks after I lost my job felt like falling down a well with no bottom. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear the buzz of my alarm and see the gray skyline outside my office window, only to remember that I no longer had a desk to go to. My calendar was empty, and the silence in my house was louder than any office chatter I had ever endured. I had built my life around work, around Brightway marketing, and now I was nothing more than a woman sitting in pajamas at the kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills and cold coffee. For the first time in years, I felt truly invisible, like I had been erased from the world. David, my husband, tried to comfort me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He was 40, steady and patient, the kind of man who fixed broken shelves and made bad jokes to make me smile. One night, I sat across from him at the dinner table, the sound of rain tapping against the window, and I finally said what had been haunting me. "I gave them everything, David," I whispered, my voice breaking, "and they threw me away like I was nothing." He reached across the table, warm and solid, and held my hand in both of his. "Then make yourself something they can never throw away," he said softly. His words sank into me like a seed, but at the time, I could not imagine how I could ever rise again. The first month was the hardest. Every rejection email from job applications felt like another slap. Companies wanted someone dynamic, vocal, a natural leader, words that all felt like coded reminders of why Charles had discarded me. My confidence cracked with each passing day, and the walls of our small living room felt closer and closer. I avoided friends because I could not bear to admit that I had failed. Even Sarah called once, leaving a voicemail I could not bring myself to return. I listened to her shaky voice saying, "I should have done more, Emily. I hope you are okay." And I turned my phone face down on the table, too bitter to answer. Money became tight quickly. My severance check did not stretch as far as I had hoped, and watching our savings shrink was a quiet kind of terror. I started cutting coupons, cooking cheap meals, and skipping little comforts like my favorite weekend coffees. The woman who once managed million-dollar accounts was now pacing the aisles of a discount grocery store, calculating every dollar. I felt humiliated and trapped in a cycle I had not chosen. Some nights, I cried in the shower where David would not hear me, the sound of running water hiding my sobs. I told myself that this was the price of being weak, that maybe Charles had been right, and maybe I was nothing more than a shadow. But in the darkest moments, something else began to stir inside me. A tiny spark of anger refused to die out. Every time I thought of Charles sitting in his big office chair, probably laughing at the story of how he finally got rid of the quiet one, that spark glowed a little brighter. I thought of the clients who had trusted me, the presentations I had built, the campaigns I had saved. My silence had never been weakness. It had been focus, discipline, and quiet strength. They had mistaken it for emptiness, and the more I thought about that, the more I realized I had a choice: stay broken or prove them all wrong. The night everything changed was quiet and ordinary. David and I were at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and half-finished cups of tea. He watched me staring at the papers and said, "Emily, maybe losing that job was the best thing that could have happened to you." I frowned, exhausted and skeptical. He leaned closer. "Because now you are free to build something that is truly yours." His words hit me differently this time. For weeks I had been drowning in grief, but that night I felt a small surge of determination. Maybe I did not have to go back to the old life. Maybe I could create a new one that would make Charles Bennett's smug face a distant memory. The spark that would change everything came on a quiet evening when I least expected it. I was sitting on the edge of the couch with my laptop balanced on my knees, scrolling through job postings that all seemed to scream the same thing. Outgoing personality required, strong communicator, confident leader. My chest felt heavy, and the familiar sting of rejection burned in the back of my throat. Then my phone buzzed, and Sarah Miller's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it like I had all her other calls, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. "Emily," she said the moment I answered, her voice trembling. "I have to tell you something. I cannot keep it in anymore." My heart skipped. Sarah had been quiet for weeks, and guilt was woven into every word. Charles is telling everyone that you were incompetent. He told Oakwood Furniture that you almost cost the company their account. He said firing you was his only option. I froze, my hand gripping the phone until my knuckles went white. Oakwood was my account. I had built that relationship from scratch, saved it twice when others dropped the ball, and Charles had the audacity to rewrite history just to protect his ego. The anger that had been simmering in my chest for weeks erupted into something sharper and more focused. "Thank you for telling me, Sarah," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the rain-streaked window, my reflection faint in the glass. Charles could twist the story all he wanted, but the clients knew the truth. Oakwood knew me. If I stayed silent now, he would win. If I wanted my life back, I had to stop letting other people control my narrative. That was the night I decided to do something terrifying. I would start my own marketing firm. The idea felt both impossible and electric. I had no office, no employees, and barely enough savings to last a few more months. But I had something Brightway could never take from me: my reputation and my skills. I thought about all the nights I'd spent fixing campaigns that Charles and his favorites had ruined. I thought about the presentations I had created that clients loved. I thought about how many times I had kept quiet while others claimed my work as their own. That silence had nearly destroyed me once. I would not let it happen again. I grabbed a notepad and started writing ideas, sketching out what my company would look like, what I would call it, and which clients I would reach out to first. By midnight, I had a name: Parker and Cupboard Marketing. The next morning, I took my first step. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number for Oakwood Furniture. The owner, Mr. Hill, answered himself, his warm voice instantly familiar. "Emily, I was wondering when I would hear from you. How are you holding up?" I hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I am starting my own firm, Mr. Hill. I wanted to let you know that I am available if you ever need help with your campaigns again." There was a pause, and I braced for polite rejection. Instead, he chuckled softly. "Emily, we trusted you, not Brightway. If you are leaving them, then so are we. Send me the details." My hand shook as I wrote down his words. In that single moment, hope returned. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with David, tears of relief sliding down my face. "I got my first client," I whispered, almost in disbelief. David wrapped me in a hug so tight I could feel his pride in my bones. That spark of change had become a flicker of light in the dark tunnel I had been trapped in for weeks. I still had no office, no team, and no guarantees. But I had something far more important: the first proof that I could rise again. And deep down, I knew that every small victory from this point on would be one step closer to the day Charles Bennett regretted underestimating me. Starting Parker & Cupboard Marketing from the corner of my garage at 38 years old was both terrifying and thrilling. The first morning I sat at a folding table with my old laptop, a secondhand printer, and a stack of sticky notes. I felt like a child playing pretend. My office had a single window that looked out at our driveway, where my husband's old truck was parked, and the smell of oil and cardboard filled the air. I kept telling myself that this was temporary, that empires started small, even if mine began between a lawnmower and a pile of Christmas decorations. What I lacked in space and resources, I made up for with a quiet, burning determination that I had never felt before. The first weeks were a blur of long days and restless nights. I created a logo, built a basic website, and sent emails to every client I had ever worked with, letting them know that I was striking out on my own. Many never responded, but the ones who did gave me hope. Oakwood Furniture became my first official client, and with that single contract, I was able to cover our mortgage and keep the lights on. I handled everything myself: client calls, campaign designs, invoices, and even the late-night technical headaches that used to be someone else's job. David would come home from his shift and find me hunched over my laptop, hair tied up, eyes red, and papers scattered across the garage floor. He never complained. He just set a cup of tea beside me and said, "Keep going, Emily. You are building something real." Slowly, the momentum grew. A local bakery heard about my work with Oakwood and hired me to design their first online marketing campaign. When their sales doubled in a month, they posted a glowing review on social media. And suddenly, I was getting inquiries from small businesses I had never even met. I was still working from my garage, but to my clients, I was Mrs. Parker, CEO of Parker & Cummered Marketing. And that title lit a fire in me. Every new email felt like another brick in the foundation of a life that was truly mine. But the journey was not smooth. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, nights when the printer jammed for the 5th time, and I wondered if I had made a mistake. There were mornings when I woke up terrified that a client would leave, that the little world I had built would crumble as quickly as my old career had. I fought through the fear with work, pouring my heart into every project, knowing that my reputation was my only safety net. Quietly, steadily, I turned that fear into fuel. I reminded myself that every late night, every setback, every risk I took was one step away from the woman standing in the rain with a cardboard box, and one step closer to the woman who would never be underestimated again. 6 months into this journey, I got my first taste of real victory. Parker & Cohen was earning enough to move out of the garage into a tiny rented office downtown. The space was small and simple, with peeling paint and a single squeaky elevator. But to me, it felt like a palace. I bought a new desk, hung a cheap sign with my company name on the door, and for the first time, I walked into an office that belonged entirely to me. On that day, I realized something powerful. I had built all of this from the same quiet strength that Charles Bennett once called a problem. My silence was never weakness. It was focus. It was patience. And now, it was becoming power. 6 months after I moved Parker & Co's into that tiny downtown office, life began to feel different. The days were still long and the nights were still filled with deadlines. But for the first time in years, I woke up excited instead of anxious. Clients were calling, emails were coming in, and every week the name Parker & Co's Marketing was popping up in conversations I was not even part of. My little company that had been born in a garage was slowly stepping into the real world. Still, I knew I needed something more than survival if I was going to truly win. I needed growth. The breakthrough came one Thursday evening at a local business networking event. I almost did not go. I had convinced myself that those events were just for loud, flashy people like Charles Bennett, the kind of people who drained me. But David insisted. "Emily," he said, gently tugging my coat over my shoulders, "you are not the same person they fired. Go show them what you have built." So I went, clutching a stack of business cards and silently promising myself I would speak to at least one person before sneaking out. That one person changed everything. His name was Richard Lawson, a 60-year-old retired investor with sharp blue eyes and a warm handshake. He listened as I told my story, starting from the day I was fired to the night I signed my first client in the garage. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and gave me a smile that was half proud, half curious. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago," he said, quiet, underestimated, until I built an empire." His words made my heart skip. Then he leaned forward and added, "I like betting on people like you." I almost did not believe him at first. People like Richard seemed to live in a different world, one where risks turned into rewards and small dreams became skyscrapers. But he was serious. Within 2 weeks, he reviewed my portfolio, visited my little office, and offered to invest in Parker & Co. on the spot. His funding allowed me to hire 3 employees, upgrade my equipment, and finally market my own business instead of surviving on word of mouth. Overnight, the company felt real. I no longer had to juggle every role alone. I could focus on strategy and client relationships, and my quiet leadership, once mocked by Charles, began to shine. The first big project after Richard's investment was a national campaign for a growing eco-friendly brand. It was the kind of work Brightway Marketing would have fought to land, and I was determined to prove that Parker & Coetzee could deliver on a bigger stage. I worked closely with my small team, and every success felt like a personal victory over the shadow of my past. When the campaign went live and sales skyrocketed, trade publications mentioned Parker & Co. by name. My phone started ringing with opportunities that once would have gone straight to Brightway. Slowly, quietly, my little company was becoming a name that people in the industry respected. And then came the moment that made me smile in a way I had not smiled in a long time. One of our new clients casually mentioned during a call, "We were actually considering Brightway for this job, but their reputation is not what it used to be. I heard their best talent left and started her own firm." I hung up the phone and sat in my chair, heart pounding. For the first time since the day I stood in the rain with a cardboard box, I felt the weight of vindication. I did not need to humiliate Charles or confront anyone. My work, my success, and my very existence in this new chapter were speaking louder than any words I had ever said in that office. 1 year after the day I was fired, I received an email that made my heart race. It came from a name I had not seen in months, Brightway Marketing. At first, I thought it might be some automatic newsletter I had never unsubscribed from. But when I opened it, I realized it was from one of their internal accountants, a man who had quietly admired my work back in the day. His message was short and sharp. "Emily, you did not hear this from me, but Charles is desperate. Brightway is bleeding clients. He is looking to sell the company." I read the email twice, then a third time, my hands trembling slightly. I could feel a slow, deep smile spreading across my face. I forwarded the email to Richard Lawson that same day. His response came within the hour. "This is the opportunity we were waiting for." We met in his office, a sleek space filled with dark wood and city views, and went over the numbers. Brightway had lost Oakwood furniture. They had lost the eco-friendly brand that now glowed on my portfolio. Word had spread that the company was poorly managed, and Charles's once powerful roar had turned into a desperate whisper. The more I learned, the more surreal it felt. I had started Parker & Co. in a garage with nothing but a laptop and a broken printer, and now I was sitting across from an investor planning to buy the company that had thrown me out like garbage. 2 months later, the deal went through. I became the new owner of Brightway Marketing, the same company that had once told me I was too quiet to lead. Walking into that office again felt like stepping into a movie I had written in my head 100 times. The walls were the same. The carpet still smelled faintly of coffee and toner. And the people who had once ignored me were now staring at me like they had seen a ghost. Charles Bennett stood in the lobby, pale and stiff, his hands tucked into his suit pockets. His forced smile trembled. "Emily, this is unexpected," he said, his voice weak, as if he could barely process what had happened. I looked him in the eye and gave a polite, controlled smile. I guess I finally spoke up, I said. My voice was calm, even sweet, but inside I felt a tidal wave of quiet triumph. There was no shouting, no gloating, no need for cruel words. My very presence in that lobby, holding the keys to his former kingdom, was the only statement I needed to make. I offered him an exit package that let him leave with dignity, because I wanted him to know that I was not like him. My revenge was not loud or messy. It was measured, clean, and complete. In the weeks that followed, I merged Brightway with Parker and Co., keeping the clients who still remained and offering jobs to the employees who had always been professional, even if they had once stayed silent. Some could not even meet my eyes when I walked by, and a part of me understood why. In a way, their silence had been the same as mine once, driven by fear, survival, and the invisible rules of that toxic little kingdom. I did not need their apologies. My success was the answer to every doubt and every whisper that had followed me out the door that rainy morning a year ago. The day I replaced the old lobby sign with Parker & Co. marketing in bold letters was the day my quiet heart roared without making a sound. I stood there, hands on my hips, taking in the sight of the company that had once rejected me, now carrying my name. It was a perfect circle, a soft and satisfying revenge that tasted better than any argument or confrontation ever could. Charles Bennett had once said I was holding the company back. Now I owned it, and without him, it was finally ready to grow. Owning Brightway Marketing felt surreal in the beginning. Walking through those halls as the new boss stirred memories of the woman who once shuffled out of this building with a cardboard box in the rain. Every corner of the office carried a ghost. The conference room where Charles told me I was too quiet. The break room where I once overheard muffled laughter as I walked out for the last time, and the row of desks where my so-called friends pretended not to see me. Now, all of it was mine. It was tempting to hold grudges, to fire the people who had turned their backs on me, or to make them feel the sting I had felt. But as I walked those halls in my new role, something inside me shifted. Revenge had already happened the moment I signed the ownership papers. I did not need to humiliate anyone to feel complete. Instead, I decided to rebuild the company into what it should have been all along, a place where talent and dedication mattered more than volume and politics. I called a staff meeting the first week after the acquisition. Employees gathered in the same conference room where I had once been dismissed, but this time, their eyes were on me with curiosity and a little fear. I stood at the head of the table, feeling the weight of the moment, and said, I know this company's history. I lived it, and I am here to make sure no one else has to experience what I did. A few heads turned, and Sarah Miller's eyes welled with tears. From today forward, success here will be earned with work, not with noise. If you are willing to build this company together, then you are part of the new Parker & Cumbridge Marketing. The room was silent for a moment, and then there were nods, small but sincere. I could see relief in some faces and regret in others. Sarah approached me after the meeting, her voice shaking. Emily, I am sorry. I should have spoken up for you back then. I held her gaze and gave her a small smile. We were all scared, Sarah. It is over now. Let's build something better together. In that moment, I realized that forgiveness was not for her. It was for me. Letting go of the bitterness freed me to move forward without the weight of the past dragging me down. In the months that followed, the company flourished under the new culture. Employees who had once been overlooked blossomed with encouragement. Clients returned, drawn to a team that finally worked with integrity instead of fear. My little garage-born business had now grown into a thriving firm with offices, staff, and a reputation for excellence. Every success felt like a quiet celebration, a reminder that the woman they fired for being silent had been strong enough to rise above it all. David would sometimes come to the office and lean against the doorframe of my corner office, grinning. "I still remember the day you came home with that box," he would say. "If only Charles could see you now." I would laugh and reply, "He already did, and that was enough." One evening, I stayed late in the office, the city lights glowing outside the window. I looked around the space that once represented pain and humiliation and realized it had transformed into a symbol of resilience and growth. My quiet nature, the very trait that had gotten me fired, had been my greatest strength all along. I had waited, I had listened, and I had built something lasting. My story was no longer about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice in my own way, without ever needing to shout. If someone had told me 2 years ago that being fired would be the best thing that ever happened to me, I would have laughed through tears. Back then, losing my job at Brightway Marketing felt like the end of my world. I was humiliated, heartbroken, and angry. I believed that my quiet nature had ruined me, that my silence had no place in a world that rewards those who speak the loudest. But now, standing in the office that bears my name, I see my story differently. That painful moment was not the end. It was the beginning of everything I was meant to become. I learned that sometimes life has to push you out of the wrong place to guide you to the right one. My firing forced me to face the truth. I had spent years waiting for someone else to see my worth instead of claiming it for myself. When I finally stopped waiting and started building, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. It was not the kind of strength that shouts in meetings or fights for attention. It was the quiet, steady strength that grows when you refuse to give up, even when the world thinks you should. If there is one message I want to leave with anyone listening to my story, it is this: do not let anyone convince you that your voice does not matter just because it is quiet. You do not have to scream to be powerful. You do not have to betray yourself to succeed. Your strength might not look like anyone else's, and that is exactly what makes it yours. I was fired for not speaking up, and yet here I am, owning the company that once threw me out, not because I changed who I was, but because I finally believed in the power of who I had always been. Revenge was never truly the goal, though I will admit that the day I signed the ownership papers was sweet in a way words cannot fully capture. But the deeper victory was not about proving Charles Bennett wrong. It was about proving to myself that my story was not over just because someone else decided it was. Success is the loudest voice of all, and sometimes it speaks in silence. Now, every time I see my employees working happily without fear, or I sign a new client under the Parker and Cumbers name, I feel a wave of gratitude for the journey I never wanted, but deeply needed. Life will always have moments that break you down, but if you let them, those moments can also build the strongest parts of you. My advice is simple: trust yourself, even when no one else does. And if the world ever tells you that you're too quiet, too soft, or too invisible to matter, remember my story and let your quiet determination speak for itself. Seats